Hi, my name is April, and this is High Fantasy Writing. With so many fantasy adaptations finally coming to screen, I thought I'd talk about one that I feel did an excellent job not doing a one-for-one page-to-screen adaptation like that, but rather an adaptation of the spirit of the story and big moments that might not be exactly the way they happened in the book. While Lord of the Rings is usually touted as one of the greatest adaptations of all time pretty much because it stayed so true to the book material, there are a lot of adaptations now that I think are doing a great job not being one for one like that, but rather keeping the spirit of the story that actually makes it better for on-screen work. And so the one I want to talk to you about today is the Wheel of Time adaptation on Amazon Prime, and specifically episode 3. To give you a little bit of backstory, I did a book report on The Fires of Heaven, which is the 5th book in the Wheel of Time series, when I was 12 years old in 7th grade. I had handmade, hand-painted Dark One seals and all to give this presentation to the class. I've been reading these books a long time. I read them as they were coming out, up to the point they had already been released, and then I did have to wait, and it was about my junior year of undergrad that the last book, A Memory of Light, finally was published. So that being said, these books have been with me for at least 2 decades. All of my formative years happened while I was reading these books. As I was growing up and developing who I am as a person, these books had a very large impact on me. So I know this world, I know this story, I know these characters, and I know how important they are to the people who love this series. I reread the first books more times than I can count while the books were being published. I would read them and reread them, waiting for the next book to come out, and then read them all again when the new release date was published. Throughout my life, even when I'm not reading these books, I think about them constantly. The world, the lore, how Robert Jordan wrote the story, his prose, the way he introduced characters, the way he brought story elements back around. I spent so much of my time while not reading thinking about this series. But at the time, I didn't really have anyone to talk about the series with because I didn't get online much. My mom didn't allow me to be on any of these public forums or anything. And I didn't know that there was such a large online presence until about 2 years ago. So for the majority of my time with these books, it was just me, my mom, and my brother who I could talk to about this series as we all read them together. But we didn't really talk about them too much. It was just mainly surface stuff about these books. These books were truly my safe haven. It was a place that I could curl up in a safe little corner and have all to myself. Now, sometimes I would think through conversations I could have with other people explaining this story and this lore to them, but whenever I actually tried, they did not care. You can talk about this series for days and days and days and have new stuff to say at the end. But the majority of the time, no one would actually care when I started talking about this story. Because let's be real, you can talk for 5 hours about this story to someone. They get bored out of their minds and you're just sitting there like, I haven't even gotten to the 3rd age yet. I've just barely scratched the surface of the breaking of the world. What are you talking about? And like I said, back in high school and undergrad, I didn't even know there was an online community. But honestly, I probably wouldn't have joined it if I had known about it because I had had some pretty bad experiences with online communities in the past. And there really wasn't a lot of content on YouTube to watch either. It wasn't until my reread in 2016 of the books that I actually started to find reviews and discussions of the books online on YouTube, Daniel Green being the main one that I found that had a lot of really great discussion and summaries of the books, where there was this little community of people who cared about these books like I did. It was honestly a pretty wild experience to see people talking about this book world that I had considered my own. I had accepted that no one else would be talking about it, and no one else cared the way I did. But here was a community online that cared about the books and the characters and the world just as much as I did. Then I heard that Amazon was going to be filming a TV adaptation of the series, and yeah, I was incredibly excited, but also very cautious. I had been burned, like so many of us had been, because fantasy adaptations to screen from books didn't have the best track record. But seriously, how amazing would that be to see these characters, this world, these huge story moments appear on screen before me, to actually see the Hall of the Tower, to watch the Aiel in the Waste, to see all of those dresses in real life that Robert Jordan loved to describe, and I love his descriptions of clothing and stuff, but seeing it on screen, it's gonna be so much better than anything my mind could come up with. To have a Lord of the Rings quality adaptation was a heady prospect, but would that be able to come to fruition? I couldn't and still can't put out of my mind the disappointment of adaptations like Aragon and Percy Jackson and The Vampire Diaries that I had been so excited to see on screen that fell short of my reading experiences. It's a struggle knowing how amazing adaptations can be, but how often they fall far short. And then Game of Thrones happened. It was a social phenomenon. People who didn't even watch the series knew about it. People who had never been into fantasy latched onto this world with its wide-spanning world building, so many characters, and medieval-esque atmosphere, and they fell in love with it. They tuned in every single week. It was a huge social phenomenon. And this wasn't just sword and sorcery fantasy. This was political intrigue. This was different cultures being experienced by a wide audience. And they were interested. They were interested in the moral grayness, not just the black and white morality we see in fantasy a lot of the times. They were interested in many of the aspects that make the Wheel of Time stand apart from the fantasy genre. Even someone I knew who couldn't get through Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, or a single Star Wars movie was making time in his schedule to sit down and watch Game of Thrones every single week. While many people who were in love with the books felt like the series fell off after season 5, and the last season wasn't exactly universally loved, it was mostly chalked up to the fact that George R.R. Martin had not finished the series, and the showrunners were expected to finish and continue on storylines that an author had spent years and years creating. But the costuming, the VFX, the acting, and the filmmaking were universally praised still, even when they felt the writing wasn't the strongest, which made people take a look at fantasy and things that they felt, of course, that couldn't be actually brought to screen in a realistic way that would satisfy audiences. It put a stop to that kind of doubt. Game of Thrones proved that a high fantasy TV show was something that could be loved by everyone, even people who hadn't been into fantasy before. And when I say everyone, I say that in a loose way because for me, the storytelling of Game of Thrones isn't something that I look for in fantasy. And so I stopped watching the show after like season 4 or 5. There are just things that Game of Thrones really focused on, such as only showing one type of culture, one type of belief system, i.e. women are less than, men should be in charge, and violence is always the answer. I just kind of got tired of every single female character being raped on screen and there being absolutely no hope in the world whatsoever. That's not what I go to media for. I go to media for an escape and some happy things to happen, since you look around the world and in my personal, what I went to school for, it's not exactly happy. But I digress. It showed that the concepts of fantasy were something that could appeal to a broad audience. And Wheel of Time fits into my type of storytelling that I love, with hope and friendship and equality for men and women, strong female characters who are not raped all the time. Yeah. And so Game of Thrones proved that a fantasy adaptation could be on par with the modern day fantasy of comic book movies and comic book TV shows that have become so prevalent and popular in mainstream media. Comic book shows that brought entirely made up worlds like Asgard and all of the Guardians of the Galaxy to the screen, that brought magical powers like Doctor Strange and Wanda Maximoff to the screen, and incredible cities like Wakanda that brought to the screen these things that are hallmarks of fantasy. This modern fantasy of comic books showed that it's possible, and Game of Thrones showed that you can put a fully high fantasy flavor to that and people will come. Lackluster CGI and cheap costuming could be a thing of the past, and a sprawling epic like The Wheel of Time would actually be a real possibility in this day and age. And then the casting announcement for The Wheel of Time Season 1 came out, and we got our Emond's Field 5 plus Lan and Moraine. And while pictures really don't show me much about a person, I prefer to see them in action. All of the broad looks were pretty spot on. It was just a matter of, can they embody this character? When they talk and walk and act, do I see the character? So I wasn't, defending the actors to the death yet, but in general, they look pretty spot on to me. I could definitely see each of those actors bringing to life these characters that I loved so much. Was Matt a little more light-skinned than I thought he would be? Yeah. Did the Barney Harris, the first actor who was playing Matt, look pretty much like he could be Yasha or Rand's brother or cousin? Yeah, so that gave me a little bit of pause, because Rand is supposed to stick out like a sore thumb. He's supposed to be obviously not related to anybody else in the Emond's Field 5. But I was willing to let it slide because I had heard from people as part of the production and people who had watched different things that the actors had done say that they did act perfectly in line with the character. Do I also really resent Daniel Henney for being so attractive that he made me start crushing on a character who I had never crushed on my entire life? Never once did I think Lan was like ooh, it's Lan. No, never. And then Daniel Henney comes on screen and I'm like, God fucking damn it. But anyways, casting decisions were all we had to go on for months. And then out of nowhere, it wasn't out of nowhere, they told us it was coming and I was definitely sitting at my laptop waiting for it. The trailer dropped and I cried. I cried because I saw the White Tower and Tarvalon in the shadow of Dragonmount for the first time on my screen in beautiful color. It was so vibrant and visceral and real on my screen. And it was really the moment that my heart leapt and I said, this is happening. This is really, really happening. I heard the amazing music. I saw these actors moving around in costume for the first time, and it was magical. This soundtrack genuinely, I believe, is going to be just as important to me as the Lord of the Rings soundtrack. It is that unique and beautiful and impactful, and I can hear the soundtrack in my mind just thinking about it. I usually can't do that with movie or TV show soundtracks. Lord of the Rings and Star Wars and Harry Potter are pretty much the only soundtracks that I can think of off the top of my head that I can hear in my head. But The Wheel of Time has become just the same. This soundtrack is gonna last. And so after that trailer, I realized this is really happening. This book series that has been so important to me for 20 years was actually coming to screen, and it looked good. I was seeing set photos, the teasers, the little behind the scenes clips from that they were being released. And I was hearing the different news coming out by people like Daniel Green, who did a really great job of keeping up with all the new things that we were learning about the Wheel of Time series. And so I knew there were going to be changes, some massive changes, going into this adaptation. I knew stuff was going to be cut. I knew there would be new story threads that were shown on screen that just happened off page in the books. And so yeah, I was really afraid that I wasn't gonna like the new stuff they put in, and I was so afraid they were gonna cut a lot of the scenes and moments and themes that I loved so much from the books. But you never know until you actually see it how it's going to be. So we settled in and waited for November the 19th. But joke's on them because we're in America. We got it on November the 18th at 7 p.m. Eastern time, which thankfully is where I am. So I got to see it before the 19th. I refreshed the Amazon page. I had to go back to the episodes tab every single time until finally those first 3 episodes were available for viewing. Right there on my screen was the evidence that this story that I thought was too dense, too sprawling, too long, way too many characters, could never be brought to screen, was actually there on my screen. It had happened. People made it, they acted it, they did the CGI, they sewed the costumes, they found the sets, and it was here, and it was real, and I wept through the first episode. Watching the first 2 episodes, I was really shocked and very pleased to see how close they kept to the books. I mean, that's a lot of content that they were able to fit, but every major thing that needed to happen happened. Every character moment. We got to see more of the characters. We got more of Perrin and Egwene and Nynaeve, Moraine, Lan, and Mat than we ever did in the books, because the books were strictly from Rand's perspective. And so we actually, while condensing the story to fit into 2 episodes, we got so much more character than we even did in the books. And I was floored. I was like, oh my gosh, they're really following the books. Nothing major is changed. in the first 2 episodes. And then we got to episode 3. Episode 3 was the first time that I truly realized that an adaptation could create completely new scenes and yet stay so true to the story. Especially in the Rand and Matt storyline, I recognized every single thing that happened, albeit in different towns, with dark friends of different names, of situations of slightly different names, but it all happened from the book. Like somehow I was watching entirely new scenes that I'd never seen before, but recognized every single minute detail of those scenes. Because, guys, let's just sit down and be honest. We do not need to go to 12 different towns, have 12 different chores that they need to do, meet 12 different innkeepers, and meet 12 different dark friends that they get away from to get the picture in an adaptation. Was it super fun to go through our little trek on the road with Rand and Matt? Yes, it was. But in the show, they were able to condense it in a way that stayed completely true to all the situations they went through in the book, while condensing it to 1 episode. Or really 2, because it did carry on over to episode 4. While I did miss some of the skills that Matt and Rand learned to earn their supper, like Rand playing the flute and Matt learning juggling, I did miss those things, but I understood that in an 8-episode season, where the episodes were only allowed to be an hour long, I understood that some things were going to have to be cut. But the way episode 3 embodies how to adapt a sprawling story into a single episode, I think that needs to be talked about. Every single storyline fits so perfectly with the story while having everything be recognizable, either on or off page from the book, even if they pulled from different chapters, different storylines, cut some characters and added a different one that combined multiple characters. It's truly the way an adaptation can work when you have to largely deviate from the source, the specifics of the source material. And so in this very long video, because this is just the introduction, I'm going to go through how The Wheel of Time Season 1, Episode 3 accomplished this feat and really won me over to all of the future changes that the season was going to need to make to the story to make it fit into a single 8-episode season. I will be going full spoiler to the end of Season 1 of The Wheel of Time, as well as to the end of Book 1 of The Eye of the World by Robert Jordan, which Season 1 largely followed. As the show splits the characters into the same mini parties that they were split into in the books after Shadar Logoth, or Shadar Logoth, I'll be breaking it down this episode 3, into those 3 plot lines and go through each of them in full, rather than jumping back and forth to each of the storylines like it does in the show. I'll go over first what happened to them in the books, then in the show, and then finally how they changed it in the show to fit about 180 pages worth of content into 1 hour-long episode. Episode 3, and also 4, covers roughly the chapters 21 to 35 of The Eye of the World. So let's start with kind of the middling group, where a lot of their story was from the book, but some of it was cut to make room for other things, and I'm hoping Season 2 is going to pick up some things that were left behind in the show Season 1. I'm hoping they bring it in Season 2. and that is Perrin and Egwene's story. In the book, Perrin and Egwene meet up as they're leaving Shadar Logoth. They are being chased by Mashadar, Fades, and Trollocs, and thankfully many of the Trollocs do get taken by Mashadar, so they don't have to deal with too many, but they do run out of the city on their horses. Bella is here. Bella, where is Bella? Anyways, they run out through the woods being chased by Trollocs and leap into the river Arenelle. They swim across, but they're separated by the fierce current of the river. Bella thankfully makes it out with Egwene, but Perrin's horse is lost somewhere in the water. And Perrin, we are following his point of view. He is struggling, he is cold, and he is so afraid that Egwene is having a rough time of it, but thankfully they quickly meet back up, and Egwene is doing pretty well with her little fire, and Bella sitting there next to her. Now in the books, Moraine's plan is to have everyone go to Caemlyn, the capital of Andor, and everyone knows generally where this city is, and so Perrin and Egwene spend a great deal of time wandering in the direction they feel like Caemlyn is. They choose to not go south along the river, which would take them to the city of Whitebridge, because they are afraid that the Trollocs and Myrddraal are going to catch them if they do. They wander the Caroline grass for days until they're approached, well, he lures them to them because he has noticed them out in the grass. He lures the pair to him. A man named Elias comes to help them. And Elias is a very strange man, almost half feral, with golden eyes. And he seems to be surrounded by a lot of wolves. And now this is where we actually learn a great deal about being a wolf brother, because Perrin starts to sense the wolves in his mind, and Elias is also a wolf brother, can sense it within Perrin, and Elias explains a great deal about this connection to the wolves that Perrin has to him, and Egwene is there as well, so she knows just as much as Perrin without actually experiencing it in her mind. Perrin immediately rejects this idea that he has some connection with the wolves. He does not want to become more wolf-like in his nature like Elias is, and so he suppresses it, he denies it, and he tries to block the wolves out of his mind. Elias wears furs, lives off the land, and does not live in a house with a community. And community is very important to Perrin, and he doesn't want to lose that with other humans, like Elias clearly has. Now during this time, Egwene practices her channeling a bit, and they fear for their separated party members, but they insist that no, everything's going to be fine, we are going to find them in Caemlyn. During this time also, Perrin has regular dreams with old Fire Eyes in his special dreams, but the moment he gets in contact with the wolves, they protect him in his dreams. Every time he has a dream where this being with fiery eyes who is trying to talk to Perrin and get Perrin to let him know more info about himself, he is stopped by a wolf growling beside Perrin. As Elias realizes that Perrin and Egwene are not used to living on the land, he quickly leads them to a group of Tuatha'an, or the Traveling People, where they meet Isla, Rhaen, and Aram. And they start traveling with the Tinkers for a bit of time. This is pretty much the point that episode 3 ends off on, and so the rest of these chapters that cover Perrin and Egwene's story were moved to both episodes 4 and 5. So them learning about the Tuatha'an, dancing with the group, learning about their ways, eating their food, getting to know Aram, and grappling with the way of the leaf all happens in episode 4. And then in the book, the Tuatha'an are not headed towards Caemlyn, the city that Egwene and Perrin are trying to get to. And so Elias tells them that either they can keep following the Tuatha'an or they can leave with him and the wolves, and he will take them towards Caemlyn again. And this is when they actually start seeing a bunch of murders of crows who are murdering things. because they are servants of the Dark One, and so they just pretty much murder anything in their path. And Perrin, Egwene, and Elias flee from these crows into an ogier steading that is abandoned, actually, but creatures of the shadow cannot go into a steading. So they find solace there in the shelter of Arthur Hawkwing's hand, a carving of him. And as they are getting water, they realize that a group of White Cloaks is also there in the steading getting water from this water source in the Caroline grass that doesn't have a whole bunch of water sources around. Perrin and Egwene run up to the shelter of Hawkwing's Eye, but they are found by the White Cloaks. Now, during this time, Perrin has been sensing the wolves in his mind, even though he's trying to reject it. Because of their proximity, he is unable to fully separate himself from the feelings of the wolves. And as the White Cloaks start approaching Perrin and Egwene, Hopper, one of the wolves that Perrin has a mental connection to, leaps at the White Cloaks to try and protect Perrin and Egwene from them, and the White Cloaks kill Hopper. Enraged by this because Perrin felt Hopper's death, Perrin takes his axe, because he has an axe already in the books, and he actually kills 2 of the White Cloaks before they subdue Perrin and Egwene and take them back to their camp captured. During this time, they torture Perrin and Egwene severely. They talk about sending them to the questioners, and they pretty much are just absolutely trapped by the White Cloaks. Now, eventually in the books, Moraine, Lan, and Nynaeve actually find this White Cloak encampment and free Perrin and Egwene, where then they all become a larger party to go to Caemlyn to meet up with Mat and Rand. And so that's all what happens in the book. But we're going to be focusing on that first part up until the point where they meet with the Tuatha'an, because that is what's covered in episode 3 of the show. And I think you'll realize how pretty much spot on all of the things that they decided to include are in the show. So in the show, Perrin and Egwene are wandering the Caroline grass, being beaten by the elements, and commiserating with each other about their friends' fates, worried that they didn't get out of Shadar Logoth as well as they did. In the show, wolves begin chasing the pair, and Perrin actually says multiple times, Egwene, go ahead, I'll hold them off, because he, just like in the books, feels extremely protective of Egwene and is willing to put himself in danger so that she isn't. In the show, they find some small amount of shelter and decide to light a fire to try and keep the wolves at bay. And Perrin tries and fails with a rock and his knife to start a fire, where Egwene comes in and tries to channel it alight. Exactly like in the books, the exact same exchange happens where Perrin is attempting to light a fire, failing. Egwene comes up and she's like, well, I can try and channel, and a fire is lit, and they both kind of look at each other like, was that you or me? Exact scene picked up from the book, dropped into the show. Now, in the show, Perrin goes to sleep in the shelter of this tree from the wind, and he has a dream with old Fire Eyes in it. But this time he's at his forge like he was back in the book. But as he goes into the forge room, there's actually a wolf eating the corpse of his wife, Layla, and she whispers to him, I know. Now, this was very jarring to me because in the books, the wolves in the dream are always a source of protection and safety for Perrin. They never try to attack him in the dream or make him feel uncomfortable. And so it was jarring to me that they were supposedly there in his dream to distress him as they're eating his dead wife. Now, at around this time, there was a lot of speculation that Layla was actually a dark friend, and that would be revealed later. And this scene actually was the first time that I kind of saw that maybe that's what they were doing, because why else would a wolf in the wolf dream of a wolf brother be distressing him by eating his dead wife? But it was later revealed by the showrunners and writers and the actress herself of the wife that no, Layla is not a dark friend. So I'm wondering what they're gonna do with that in the future, but that was the one aspect of the story that really jarred me, and I was like, wait a second, what's going on here? Why is a wolf being distressing in Perrin's dream? They're supposed to be there to protect him. But in the show, Perrin then wakes up from the dream, and he and Egwene have to run from the wolves again until they actually find a set of wagon tracks. And it then looks like the wolves were actually herding them towards the wagons, sort of like Elias led them to the Tuatha'an in the books. The wolves led Perrin and Egwene to the Tuatha'an in the show. And this is where we kind of leave off, because in the show, Perrin tries to go first because he still feels so guilty about Layla's death, and he feels like if something bad's gonna happen to them, he should be the one that it happens to. He should be there to give Egwene time while he's being hurt for Egwene to escape. But Egwene, of course, says, no, whatever you're feeling, it wasn't your fault. We go together. They go together and they meet Isla, Ran, and Aram, the Tuatha'an who are traveling through the caroling grass. So the show did cut Elias entirely from the story in season 1, and Perrin's relationship with the wolves is not explained at all. It also is a bit different because the Tuatha'an are heading towards Tar Valon, which is the city that Moiraine had said everyone was going to be meeting in this book, in this season of the show. Their main goal is not to get to Caemlyn, it's to get to Tar Valon. And so this allows them to be able to travel with the Tuatha'an all the way up until they get to Tar Valon, where everybody's heading. Now, a wonderful connection that Egwene and Perrin have in the books is that Egwene knows about Perrin's connection with the wolves, but she doesn't tell anyone because Perrin is so obviously uncomfortable by it that she isn't going to be the one to tell anyone about this secret. But in the show, since nobody knows about the secret, she wasn't told, Perrin wasn't told. She does immediately tell Moiraine, which I know some people saw that and they were like, oh, well, I really liked how great of a friendship it showed Egwene and Perrin having, that she's gonna hold the secret for him. But I was okay with it because the show, I believe, is transferring that secret for the secret of Perrin killing his wife. Because in episode 5, as Perrin and Egwene are captured by the White Cloaks and are being tortured, Perrin tells Egwene that he deserves this because he accidentally killed his wife. He confesses to Egwene something that he hadn't told anybody. And up until the end of season 1, Egwene doesn't tell anyone either. And this is a much bigger secret for Egwene and Perrin to have together, rather than Perrin just being a wolf brother. That was a thing that the show did a couple of times, was making the conflicts in the first book much more serious than they had been in the books. So Perrin accidentally killing his wife in the Trolloc Raid of Winter Night is a big thing, much more impactful than him just being a wolf brother, which sure, people might be like, oh, that makes me a little uncomfortable and nervous, but I mean, accidentally killing your spouse is kind of a bigger secret to keep. So I think that they will be able to show Egwene and Perrin's friendship, which I think they did a great job of in the later episodes with things not even connected to the secret. I think this secret is going to be another layer to their friendship that's going to be really great in the show. And so I already went over a little bit of how the show adapted the chapters that Perrin and Egwene were in the book, and how it condensed some things and made them better for a show format. I understood why they made the changes they did. I understood why they didn't bring in Elias quite yet, because there's a lot going on in these 8 episodes, and it did kind of fuel the mystery of who is the Dragon Reborn that was revealed in episode 7. So I do understand why they made the change to not explain Perrin's wolf brotherness, and I'm really hoping that they focus on that as part of his story in season 2. Because I think season 1 was really focusing on Perrin and his relationship with violence, and how he's reluctant to be violent because of him accidentally killing his wife. I believe that was the focus of season 1, and I believe season 2 is going to focus more on him being a wolf brother and explaining that, even though they did it in book 1 of the series. And so there were so many scenes and interactions that were dead on one-for-one replicas of scenes from the book. And even though their plotline in episode 3 was a bit slower, I felt like there were so many wonderful character moments between Perrin and Egwene that it still kept me enraptured the entire time. I still loved when the story cut back to them, because we saw their friendship and we saw them figuring out how to survive in the world. And now I'm going to go on to the meat and potatoes of this episode, the plotline with Mat, Rand, and Tom. Now in the books, Tom was already introduced in Emond's Field. He was the gleeman that the town had hired for their Beltane entertainments. He was introduced along with Moraine and Lan, and I totally understand why that's a lot of characters to introduce in episode 1. He doesn't really do much at all in the story until Shadar Logoth, and when they run from Shadar Logoth, he just kind of hangs around, says, yeah, don't trust Aes Sedai, and that's about the extent of his character. And so in these chapters of the book, we pick up with Rand, Mat, and Tom running away from Shadar Logoth. They run down the river and they find a trading boat that has been moored up for the night. They hop over on top and they say, hey guys, let's go right now because there are Trollocs actively climbing onto this ship. And we meet the wonderful recurring character, Bail Domon. Aboard the Spray, Tom teaches Mat and Rand how to be amateur gleemen. He teaches Rand how to play the flute, and he teaches Mat how to juggle, but neither of them are super adept at it. But it's very sweet. Rand and Mat learning from Tom and gaining some skills they will need later in the chapters. And they very quickly get to the city of Whitebridge along the river, where a dark friend recognizes Mat and Rand, and they have to flee Whitebridge because a murdrow shows up, and Tom says, here's all my stuff, y'all lads run, and I'm going to throw some knives at a fade. And this is the last time we see Tom. He vanishes from the story at this point as the boys run from Whitebridge and are on the road that is going to lead them to Camelin, where they hope to meet up with all the rest of their crew. And this is the Sing for Your Supper portion of book 1, which to some is kind of a slog to get through, but others, like myself, I really enjoyed this section because it's just Mat and Rand. If you know what happens later in the series, it gets really heavy and it's just nice seeing Matt and Rand not have to deal with too terrible of things. They're still going through it. It's still not a great time because Matt is being influenced by the dagger more and more. He's being more suspicious of everyone. His temper is flying out of control more often than not. He's pretty much never happy. He's just either depressed or angry. But this is the point in the book where Matt and Rand travel along the road and they play the flute or juggle or muck out stables or help feed the chickens and cows for their supper and a place to sleep at night. So they stop at farmsteads, they stop at inns, they stop at taverns, wherever they can to try to make a buck, find out any news, and keep on their way to Camelin. We actually see them stop at the Grinwells farm, which is seen in episode 4. They stop at the Grinwells farm and they kind of meet them, and there are some recurring characters later on from that family, but they keep going and regularly meet dark friends along the road that they have to fight off or escape from because all of the dark friends in the area are looking for Matt, Rand, and Perrin. So they meet Pater, a young man who is in pretty much a boy. He's in way over his head, who tries to capture them, pretty much just being like, hey guys, I know who you are, stay right there. And they're like, oh yeah, no, we're just gonna go now. And he's like, oh, shucks. And then they meet a lady in a fine dress who tries to stab them with a poisoned dagger. And in the city of Four Kings, they see a strange man sitting in a not very reputable inn that they're playing at, and they suspect he might be a dark friend. Now, this is the specific inn that I want to focus on from the book because the innkeeper has already made it clear that Matt and Rand aren't really going to be allowed to leave. They must continue to play to bring in new customers for him, and they will be sleeping in the inn. And it's kind of, they get the feeling that the guy wants to rob them. So they're on high alert from the innkeeper, and then this strange man who seems to be some sort of noble is also staring at them, and they think he's a dark friend. Howell Goad is the man who they suspect to be a dark friend, and as they go down to their bunks for the night, they realize that they're kind of in the basement. There is a very strong door closing them in, and there is a window that is barred shut. And so they feel utterly trapped. A huge storm has blown in. It's been going on all day, and it's just getting worse and worse as the night goes on. Lightning flashing, thunder rumbling, and Rand and Matt feel very, very trapped in the Four Kings city, in the basement, a very enclosed room in the inn, as number one, the innkeeper is trying to steal from them, and a dark friend is trying to turn them into a murdral so that the dark friend can gain a claim in the dark frienddom. And so we see Rand and Matt struggling desperately to get out of this room. They hear Howell Goad's men at the door trying to bust it down. They brace things against the door to try and stop that, and they're trying to pry the bars loose from the window, so at least they have a place to run if they can. And in a moment of intense desperation, as Howell Goad's men have started creaking the door open, the bars of the window are still so solidly stuck into the stone of the wall that it seems like all is lost. They are captured. A bolt of lightning flashes from the sky and rips apart half of the wall of this room that Rand and Matt are in, blasting open the window, blinding Matt in the process, and Rand is able to grab him and all of their stuff, flee, look around and see that all of the innkeeper's men and Howell Goad's men who had been waiting outside the window in case they tried to escape that way are all dead from this lightning strike. And they run. I don't know about you, but that sounds very similar to something that happened in the show. And that is pretty much where these chapters end off in the book. Now, in the show, Tom has not been introduced yet. So Matt and Rand escape Shadar Logoth on a much less comfortable ride downriver as they just grab a big piece of driftwood and just paddle away down the river Arianel. And so they escape on this driftwood downstream, get to the other side of the river, and Rand immediately starts calling out for Perrin and Egwene. And Matt quickly shushes him and says, hey, you don't know what all is around. We could be attracting attention that we don't want. And Matt suggests, let's just go back to the Two Rivers. They're probably heading on their way back there because this adventure is not working out for us. I've got people back at home. I don't know where to go from here, but Rand says no. We are going to Tar Valon because I know that that's where Moraine said we needed to be, and Egwene trusts her, so that's where Egwene will be. And that's his entire motivation. We're getting to Tar Valon no matter what. And so they continue traveling on until they reach the town of Breen's Spring, which is actually a town in the books on their way to Caemlyn, but in the show they have expanded it and different events happen here than happened in the book. Now they go into town and they find a tavern that isn't named, I don't think, in the show, but in the extra materials, it is called the Four Kings Inn. Four Kings, a town that they definitely stayed in the book. And this town is really where the show flexes its muscles in being able to condense a large portion of the book down to one episode. In the Four Kings Tavern, Matt and Rand go in to ask if Perrin and Egwene have been around. The bartender says, nope, but there is a gleeman. And here we have Tom's introduction, which I think is a lot better introduction, I know, don't crucify me, than in the books, because he is introduced through song. What he does best. His whole shtick is singing and telling stories and juggling and entertaining. And that's how he is introduced to us in the show. Now, Tom sings a song called The Man Who Can't Forget, who, for anyone who's listening, it's about Lews Therin, it's about the former dragon, and him destroying the world. And in a show where every second counts, I think this was a really great world building moment, because there's tons of songs and things in the books that are just happy, fun little country town songs that are mentioned a whole bunch, but they don't do much for the plot. And so having a song sung by a main character that forwards the plot or adds depth to the backstory, I think it was a really good choice, because we just don't have time to have all of these fun little country songs that don't actually mean anything for the story. And so Tom ends his song, comes down asking for donations for the gleeman from everybody around, and this is a point where a man comes and bumps into Matt, clearly picking his pocket, and then Tom bumps into him, clearly picking his pocket again, and when Tom comes up to the pair of them, Matt says, sorry, too depressed for charity. Tom makes a little quip about they should get up there if they think they can do better. And then Dana asks for payment for their soup, and Matt realizes his money has been stolen. Tom reveals that he's gotten the money back from the pickpocket, says, hey, look, the world's tough out here. Better learn your lessons quick. Sure, it might be painful, but sucks to suck. I do think that it was very cute, him telling them to get up there and do better, because it's a nice allusion to when they actually do that in the book. Now, as Matt is completely penniless now, and Rand isn't doing too much better on money, they approach Dana, the barkeep, and ask her if there's any jobs that they can do so that they can at least get a tarp to stay out of the wind tonight. And she says, all right, chop some wood, and you can have a place to stay. And here we are at the singing for your supper portion, where Rand and Matt just do little odd jobs so that they can have a good place to stay and some food for the night. This is also when we start to really see Matt's change in mood and demeanor. Because as Rand goes out to start chopping the wood, Matt says, hey, I didn't agree to chopping wood. I wanted to do something else for my bed. And Rand is just like, shut up, help me. And Matt says, no. You're the one who wanted to continue on this way, not go back to the Two Rivers, so screw you, and I'm not going to. And he kind of blows up at Rand and says, I don't know why you're going to Tarvalon for Egwene. She wouldn't do it for you. And this is all just some grand joke. We can't trust Moraine. We don't know what's actually going on. And he goes back into the tavern to talk to Dana about getting back to the Two Rivers, though he does claim that he's heading back to Berlan, which is one of the first towns in the book that the characters actually stop in, and it's their first sign of a city, even though it's like the smallest city in the entire world. They're all just like, oh my gosh, we're country bumpkins in a huge city. So that was a nice callback to the books, was Matt trying to get back to Berlan, when really he's trying to get back to the Two Rivers. Now, as Matt is trying to convince Dana to give him a job that he doesn't hate in order to get some money, he mentions that he was a horse trader back in the Two Rivers, which was also a nice allusion to the books, because in the books his family are horse traders, which I actually, in retrospect, think that it really fits that his family in the show are kind of not well regarded in the town, because in our world, a horse trader is actually kind of slang for somebody who's not trustworthy. Well, it's an old-timey one because now it's used car salesmen. We consider them like, oh yeah, they're trying to cheat you out of things. They're trying to sell you something, sell you on something, saying that it's a better quality than it actually is, and charging you more for it than really it's worth. And that's a holdover from horse trader, which has had the same stigma around it. So in the books, Matt's family are horse traders, and in the books, it's never seen as a bad thing. They're actually quite respected, but I can see where they made the leap in the show to make his family not that respected, and tying that to being a horse trader. So I just thought that was a fun little thing that I noticed that actually makes the change from the books to the show not as big of a change as some people think. So he claims he's a horse trader. Dana humiliates him by saying, hey, anybody need a horse trader with no horses? And he ends up just serving beers, where his sharp tongue gets him a couple of tips. This is when he lets Dana know he's trying to get out. And Dana has a really great mini monologue where she talks about how great it is that he and Rand actually got out of their shit town, because she didn't have that option. She'd love to get out of Breen Spring, but she just can't. She does tell him that the quickest way back to Berlan is by riverboat, a nice allusion to Captain Domon and the spray, but he says that, yeah, Rand's not coming along with me. She asks why he's going back, because she would give anything to get out of her small town. And Rand says it's because he's got people that he needs to look after, his sisters. In the show, they made Matt's family not the greatest, and so he's the main caretaker for his sisters. And he knows that his parents probably are not taking care of him the way they should now that he's gone. And so his main motivation is to get back to help them. And I think this is actually a great change that they made from the books to the show, because Matt in the books was just a scoundrel to be a scoundrel. He just loved playing pranks. He loved stealing pies, cooling on the windowsills. Like, he liked just being a scoundrel for no reason other than he liked it. In the show, it gives him more of a reason to be a little untrustworthy. In the books, it literally At the beginning, Rand sees a dark cloaked figure on the road, and he tries to tell his father, Tam, about it, and Tam doesn't really fully believe him. But then he gets into town and talks to Matt about it, and Matt's like, oh my god, yeah, I saw the same thing. And in the books, in Rand's head, he literally says, welp, I'm definitely not going to try and bolster my argument by saying Matt saw him too, because Matt being involved in any way immediately makes everything less trustworthy. So that was already in the books, and it makes more sense in the show that Matt kind of has to be, because he has to support his family because his parents aren't. And because he's so young, he doesn't have the time, I'm assuming, since to get a real job because he's taking care of his sisters so much. He steals and is a scoundrel for more reasonable reasons. It's also more compelling to see where he's going to land on this adventure, because he wants to get back home for good reasons, to protect his sisters. So he's being pulled towards Tarvalon by Moraine. And while we as the viewers might see Moraine's calling them to adventure as a classic of storytelling, and we understand, yeah, he probably has a huge role to play in this plot. It's probably going to be world-changing stakes that he needs to handle. In putting yourself in his shoes, it makes it much more compelling to consider that he has a family back home who needs him. So it's not just oh, Matt doesn't want to go with Moraine just cause, and isn't he so silly for that because we know that plot-wise he's going to be important. It's much more compelling that he actually has family he needs to care for back home. And how is he going to justify staying away and taking part in this huge world-spanning issue when he's got issues back at home that aren't being dealt with? Now, it's at this point he has made a couple of bucks from serving drinks that he takes his leave of the tavern and decides to go to a figure that he and Rand saw as they walked into town of a red-haired man in a cage. He was riddled with arrows, and he was wearing this strange garb that swathed him in brownish gray colors, and he looked distinctly not like the rest of the townsfolk. Matt saw a shiny little rock that said, in a video game, little sparkles, pick this item up, pick this item up. And so Matt decides to go and pick up the item. And the change to Matt's story, again in this situation, leads viewers to be more sympathetic towards him. He's not stealing from this dead man in a cage for flippant disregard for the rules or just because it's shiny and he wants it. He genuinely is penniless at the moment. He has nothing, and his family has nothing, and he needs to provide for them. He needs to get back to them and give them any sort of money that he can. So him going to steal from this dead man isn't as reprehensible as it could have been. Tom, however, is also heading towards the man in the cage, and in true Tom fashion, produces a knife from his sleeve and says, hey, I will kill you. And he and Matt have a bit of an exchange where Tom understands that Matt is in a desperate situation, and so he allows Matt to loot the corpse while he stands to the side. It's at this point that Tom overhears Matt apologizing to the dead man and saying that he has sisters he has to care for. And from Tom's facial expressions, you can tell that that has really softened him and his opinion of Matt. He also has revealed that he knows exactly where Matt is from because of Matt's dress, his attitude, and the way that he talks, which shows that Tom is much more worldly than he might have first appeared. This is also where he gives Matt a little bit of backstory about the Aiel, which is a group of people in the Wheel of Time universe. He explains that this man was no threat. He was just murdered because people were afraid of something that they didn't understand. That he actually only would have been a danger to the people of the town had he been veiled. Tom admits that yes, the Aiel are incredible warriors and you're dead the moment you realize that they want to kill you, probably before you realize they want to kill you, you're dead. But that wasn't the case with this young man. Now this condenses a lot of the Aiel world building that was scattered throughout the first couple of books into an easily identifiable little monologue by Tom where watchers can pick up and remember it probably a little bit better than they would be able to if it had just truly been scattered like it was in the books. And it shows that Tom is much more worldly and open of different cultures than, say, the people of Green Spring are. It introduces the idea that the people of this world, many are very afraid of what they don't understand, and things that they have been told through history are dangerous. And they're willing to just immediately kill it because they're afraid. This also shows us that shadow spawns such as Trollocs and Myrddraal are not the only enemies we have to watch out for. Even though many people don't know what Trollocs are, as Tom explained when Matt said, "I haven't survived Trollocs to be killed by a singer," and Tom says, "Wait, what type of kid from the Two Rivers has seen a Trolloc?" Which shows that people in the larger world, at least in this region, aren't likely to know what Trollocs are. It shows that there's more enemies than just, the orcs of the land. There's people who could be enemies too. Meanwhile, Rand is finished chopping wood and Dana takes him to his quarters for the night, which she mentions there is an ironwood door, so no one can hear him and Matt playing a little slap and tickle. Does that sound familiar to the book at all? And she and Matt sit down to have a pint of ale and talk over the world. Another nice little monologue, well, not really monologue, but conversation between Rand and Dana, which sets up the world and people's experiences in it, where Dana drops a lot of Easter eggs from the books, like the Stone of Tyr, the Lion Throne of Caemlyn, and a Trolloc. I want to see a Trolloc, lol. And so Rand is talking about how he doesn't actually know what he's doing. He just tries to do what's right. He doesn't really think about the Wheel of Time, whereas Dana does. Dana feels trapped by the Wheel of Time and the pattern of the world, which many people in the Wheel of Time universe do. They feel like it's sort of predestination, that they don't have many choices. And Dana says that the choices that she did have landed her here, and she doesn't like it. And Rand says, yeah, I haven't experienced that. I don't really think about the Wheel of Time. I just do what I do, which is a great way to set up differing belief systems within the world. And it's at this point that Rand tells Dana that he's actually heading east, not back to Baerlon with Matt. He also reveals that he's so ignorant of so many things in the world. He just doesn't know what he's doing. He doesn't know the different struggles other people have because he's only ever lived in the Two Rivers. And I think this little conversation with Dana was a really nice distillation of Rand's character. He's just a simple guy who loves his friends and his family and his community and just wants to do what's best for them. He has no desires for grandeur or heroics. He just wants to live a happy, quiet life, just doing good in the world. And that he hasn't ever had to deal with any big issues that there's no clear right answer for. He's, generally speaking, in his small town, only dealt with issues that clearly there's a good answer and there's a bad one. He's never had to deal with moral ambiguity in his life before. And this is the point where Dana makes a pass at Rand, feeling like there might be some romantic connection. Rand leans back and he says, "So sorry, no, I was not intending for there to be any romantic thing here." And Dana gets up and starts acting suspicious. And she closes the door and says, "I shouldn't have braided my hair. It makes me look too much like her." For non-readers, this is a clear indication that she knows way more than she's letting on to. But for me, in my reader brain, slight spoilers for later in the series, really just the end of book 2, something that's revealed. I was screaming, "Oh my god, is she Lanfear? Is that Lanfear? Have we already introduced Lanfear?" But anyway, she was not. It's okay. Crisis averted. Deep crisis averted. So Rand says, "Ooh, what's going on here?" And Dana reveals that she is intending to capture Rand and Matt. She gets his sword from him. He's a clumsy oaf, not understanding what's going on. And she holds him at sword point and says, "Nope, we're waiting on Matt." Now, Rand obviously is horrified that someone who seemed so kind and nice to them is actually a dark friend, and so he begins to slam himself into the door in an attempt to escape. And Dana says that, "Dude, that's ironwood. A man 3 times your size wouldn't be able to break it down." And I thought it was a really nice moment of, there's a couple of times in the show where they mention how stubborn the Two Rivers folk are, but it's always just said. We don't really see a clear example of it, and I thought that this was a great example of it. Dana looking at Rand and saying, "Dude, you're not gonna break that down," and Rand saying, "I'm gonna do it anyways," and just slamming into a door that, for all we know, there's 0 chance of him getting through. But he does it anyways. He slams against the door again and again and again. And in his moments of desperation, the door comes off its hinges. Almost like something that happened in the basement of the inn in the Four Kings. They're trapped in a room by a dark friend. The room appears to not have any exits, and in a moment of desperation, something happens that gives them an escape. And Rand runs through the streets to find Matt and say, "Yo, we gotta go." And later in the season, just as later in the book, it's revealed that that lightning strike in the book and Rand beating down and busting down the door was both Rand using the one power for the first time. Now Rand and Matt flee through the city, but of course Dana, knowing the town better than they do, she's able to cut them off, and they're held at sword point, where she explains why exactly she's a dark friend and why she's doing what she's doing. She feels that the Wheel of Time is a prison where people are forced to live on in misery. She says that the Dark One wants to change that. He wants to break the wheel. He wants to use the Dragon Reborn to stop the Wheel of Time and free everyone from this prison that they're living in. She says that this will stop all suffering. But the Aes Sedai are the ones who want to capture the dragon and kill him so that he can't break the wheel. She also drops the line that she sees all 5 of you in her dreams, which then opens the question of who is the Dragon Reborn up to more than just the 4 that it had previously been alluded to: Matt, Rand, Perrin, or Egwene. This is a great way to expand the world and show the shades of gray and different types of people who serve the shadow. All the people who are serving the shadow aren't doing it for mustache twirly reasons. They aren't all doing it so that they can have power or money or renown. Some of them are just regular people who are tired of the way the world works, and they see the shadow as an alternative to what they have always known. It shows that there are a lot of people really suffering, and they're trying to stop that suffering. It's a lot more understandable of a reason than just, I'm somebody who wants power over others. That's a pretty clearly evil reason to want to serve the shadow. But Dana's reasoning is quite simple and understandable. I've had a terrible life. I feel like this wheel of time is a prison that I'm stuck in, and if I can find a way to break that, then I will. I also think Dana is a perfect encapsulation of all of the dark friends that they meet along their journey in the books. She has the sweet innocence of Pater, the young person who wants more from their life than the small town that they were born into. She is the lady in the fine dress, using her looks and charm to make herself seem less dangerous than she is. And she is Howell Goad, a dark friend who has trapped our protagonists in a room and is using her force and power to hold them there until a Murdral arrives. This all leads Rand to use the one power to break out of his confinement and enhances Matt's suspicion and distrust of everyone that the dagger is making more prominent in him, but it's also giving him some real concrete things to point to say, yeah, I'm suspicious because of that. And so at this point, Dana lets them know that a Murdra has been called and she's going to keep them there so they can be captured. But at this point, Tom, in true Tom fashion, does not care that she is a woman, does not care that her back is turned, and he tosses his dagger through her neck, killing her instantly, and he's like, yo, we gotta go. Did you not hear her? She's a dark friend, she wants to capture you, I'm heading east. And Rand and Matt say, sounds good to me. And they escape the town of Breen's Spring and escape their first interaction with a dark friend trying to capture them. And so as you can see, the storyline with Matt and Rand was really condensed in a very smart way from the books to the show. I feel like it really hit on the themes in a way that watchers could keep up with. When you're reading a book, you have a lot of time to sit and to think about the story. Books are very different in their pacing than TV shows are much of the time, especially high fantasy. And so condensing this sing for your supper bit of the story into one town, I feel like really elevated it in a way that made sense for a show rather than a book. I think Tom's introduction was better for the show because in the books, you meet everybody in Emond's Field, but you have like 10 chapters to do that. In the show, we needed to introduce everybody and have you care about them in one episode, because that's just the nature of TV shows. And so in the first episode, it makes sense to pare down the character list because my friend who's never read the books, I watched the show with him after I had seen it, and his first comment about the first episode was, that's a lot of characters to keep straight. And so I think introducing Tom there, and especially since he doesn't really do anything until they leave Shadar Logoth, I think that it was a really smart decision for the show to hold off his introduction until episode 3. This also allows Tom to be a bigger part of the Sing for Your Supper part of the story. Because in the books, he's not there for any of it. He teaches them everything they need to know on the riverboat, which is already paid for. And then in Whitebridge, the first town they go to, they're separated. and Matt and Rand have to make it on their own. This way, we get to see Tom give more backstory about himself, help them through their singing for their supper a bit more, and enhance all three of the characters' stories. It enhances the story in general because we can add in some of Tom's world building and his backstory instead of it just being a series of chapters where Rand and Matt arrive in town, they sing for their supper, they get chased out by dark friends, they go to the next town, and repeat it all again. This way, we at least get an episode, 2 episodes, episodes 3 and 4 of Tom expanding the world and expanding his character in more direct ways than he was able to in the books. So the Matt, Rand, and now Tom storyline in the show was really what made me look at the show and say all of those were completely new situations with new characters, but I recognized every single thing that happened. And I think that is a mark of a wonderful adaptation, where you can look at everything and say, yeah, none of that was directly from the book, but everything was from the book. You know what I mean? With Dana being a combination of all 3 dark friends that they meet along the road, of the inn being somewhere that they have to work for their supper, and also somewhere where they're trapped and have to escape using the one power, and as a place to expand the world building and characters. And so finally, we're onto the storyline that is the most different from the books. This is a largely created storyline for the show to give Moraine more stuff to do and the Aes Sedai more screen time in the first season. The storyline with Nynaeve, Moraine, and Lan leaving Shadar Logoth is quite different. Nynaeve had already been a part of their group. She had met with everybody in Baerlon, and so Nynaeve actually was separated from Moraine and Lan as they were escaping Shadar Logoth, but on the other side of the river, she is able to track and sneak up on Lan and Moraine, shocking Lan a great deal. In the book, the trio have to now decide who they are going to try to find first, because in the book, Moraine had given Rand, Matt, and Perrin a Tarvalon coin that was enchanted so that she could find them wherever they are as long as they had the coin on them. She realizes that Rand and Matt are going downriver quickly and the coin has been separated from them. But Perrin is off to the east and she can still sense him with his coin, and so they decide that they are going to go after Perrin first and just hope that Rand and Matt are going to be fine. It's in these chapters from Nynaeve's point of view that we see who Nynaeve is as a character. We see how she distrusts Moraine, how she's beginning to have feelings for Lan, and her stern commitment to healing. Because even though Moraine was hurt, she still decides to heal Moraine the best of her abilities, even though at the moment Nynaeve is rejecting the idea that she can channel. Because Moraine reveals to her in these chapters that actually she's been channeling to heal people kinda this entire time. She goes over with Nynaeve the first moment that Nynaeve channeled, because in the books, channelers, when they touch the one power for the first time, they go through a sickness where their body is trying to acclimate to being able to touch the one power, and many actually die. But because Nynaeve survived, she was able to tap into the power in minor ways to make her healing stronger. But Nynaeve rejects this and she says, no, it's just because I'm good at what I do. I'm a healer, I'm a wisdom. I know my herbs, I know my teas and my salves and my ointments. I'm just really good at it. It's not the power. But Moraine tries to convince her that yes, she actually is using the power to heal. The main time that Nynaeve heals Moraine was actually in Shadar Logoth. Moraine overextended herself to fight back the Trollocs that were chasing them into the city, around the city. She overextends herself, and in this city she's quite weak, and Nynaeve needs to heal her with herbs. But in these chapters, she just does some minor healing and travels along with Moraine and Lan. Nynaeve's continual through line is that she has left the Two Rivers because she is going to bring the children home. They have been stolen from their homes by a strange woman who has plots of her own, and Nynaeve's goal is to protect these kids and bring them back to the safety of the Two Rivers. That is her driving force for the entirety of book 1. And also we see that's her driving force in season 1 as well. During these chapters, it's actually Nynaeve, Lan, and Moraine who find Egwene and Perrin as they're captured by the White Cloaks, and they sneak into the White Cloak camp and rescue Perrin and Egwene. Nynaeve heals Perrin's wounds because he kind of got the worst of it from the White Cloaks, and her salve works suspiciously well. Why ever could that be? And then the 5 of them make their way to Caemlyn to hopefully meet up with Mat and Rand. And that's really the only parts of their story that are in the book. And so on the surface, the storyline in this show is quite different from the books. In the books, Nynaeve chases the party all the way to Baerlon, and that's when she meets up with Rand, Perrin, Moraine, Mat, and Egwene, and Lan. But in the show, she doesn't catch up to them until after Shadar Logoth because Baerlon is skipped over in the show. But very similarly, she tracks the party, even though Lan is an expert woodsman and is very difficult to track. She's able to track them. She sneaks up on him, and she demands to take the children home. So in the show, Nynaeve holds a very nasty looking Trolloc blade to Lan's neck and demands that he takes her to the children. He says that they lost them in Shadar Logoth, and she accuses Moraine, who is currently passed out on the ground from the tainted Trolloc blade that she was struck with during Winter Night. Moraine is out of commission, unconscious, so Nynaeve accuses her of leaving the children, and Lan says no, she didn't leave them, I did. And Nynaeve proceeds to attempt to murder Lan, and Lan, being Lan, disarms her and knocks her out and ties her up. Next, Nynaeve wakes up tied to a tree with a worried Lan tending to an unconscious Moraine. And Lan tells Nynaeve that he needs her skill at healing to stabilize Moraine. And Nynaeve pretty much threatens, like, hey, you need to give me what I want or else I won't help her. And you know she's gonna die if I don't help her. Now, I believe this was a complete bluff on Nynaeve's behalf. I think she was definitely trying to appear tougher than she is, because it's a thing she does a lot in the books. She claims that she's gonna hurt somebody or not help them, but she's a healer at heart. She will always heal people who need it because she can't stand seeing people in pain if she can stop it. And so Lan watches over her as she collects herbs from around the area to make a salve to put on Moraine's wound. And it's very adorable, Lan watching over her, literally looking right over her shoulder as she's grinding stuff up with her mortar and pestle. And she notices that Lan wants to ask a question. She demands he asks it, and he asks, "How did you track me?" And in true Nynaeve fashion, she gives a flippant answer, and she's like, "Yeah, I told you you could ask. Didn't say I was going to answer." Which I think is adorable because, as we find out later in the season and in the book, Nynaeve and Lan develop a romantic connection to each other. But in this moment, they are feeling each other out, seeing who the other person is, and Nynaeve and the viewer get a little bit more info on the bond between Lan and Moiraine, in that Nynaeve says, I hear that you can feel what they feel, be prepared because this is going to hurt, when she's tending to Moiraine's wound. And so we as viewers get a nice little bit of world building in the bond between an Aes Sedai and her warder. And at this point, Nynaeve lets Lan know that while she's stabilized Moiraine, if we don't find another Aes Sedai who can actually heal her, she's not going to make it. Which then Lan decides to go off and find some Aes Sedai to bring Moiraine and Nynaeve to so that Moiraine can be healed. Now, earlier in the show, we had heard that there were some Aes Sedai that were heading to this general area of the world to capture a false dragon named Logain Ablar. And so it is assumed that Lan is going to search for these Aes Sedai that he knows to be in the area. And so this is the point in the show where things really start to deviate from the books, at least in this storyline. Perrin and Egwene's storyline in this episode is pretty much verbatim from the books. They have only removed things, not added anything. Mat and Rand's part of the story was a great condensing of everything that happened in the books, hitting the key points and key things that you need to know about the world, while even though it wasn't exactly verbatim like Perrin and Egwene's was. And while Nynaeve, Lan, and Moiraine's storyline starts out like it does in the books, it takes a strong deviation where they don't go to find Perrin and Egwene, but rather some Aes Sedai to help Moiraine heal. And I do think that this is an example of how creating plot lines specifically for the show actually can work really well. Now you may be asking, this is such a huge story and we're having to cut so much, why would you cut things and add things that didn't actually happen? Shouldn't you spend more time trying to put the events that are actually in the books in the show rather than creating new storylines that are going to take up time from the stuff from the books? And I do hear you on that. The entire story with Moiraine, Lan, the other Aes Sedai, Nynaeve, and then introducing Stepin in episode 4 and continuing to episode 5 did take a great deal of time to add in story elements that had not been in the books. But I think that this show was really smart about which storyline they chose to add. So book 1, The Eye of the World, is almost entirely from Rand's point of view. We get a couple of chapters from Perrin's point of view and from Nynaeve's, but we don't get any points of view from Moiraine until the very, very end of the book. Not even a full chapter, just a small scene from her point of view. And in book number 2, she only gets one point of view chapter. And in book 3, I don't think she has any point of view chapters. For such an integral and fascinating character to the story, that's not a lot of time that a reader gets to know her. And in media format, that's even harder for just the short episodes that we get in a TV show to connect and understand this character. In the books, we only get to see her from the point of view of very young children who know nothing about this world. And the tone that the showrunners decided to take this series was a much more adult tone and focusing less on we have no idea what's going on in the world, and breaking that up with we actually get to see from the points of view of people who do understand this world. It's not new to them. So while we do get the coming of age, young farm kids going into a larger world they don't know, we also get to see from characters who are much older and much more experienced. Tower politics are also incredibly complex, and one of the things that I loved most about the books. And we don't really get to see that from an adult Aes Sedai's point of view until much later in the series. So I think that introducing that to new viewers right early on in the show really expands the storytelling immediately and lets people know that, hey, this is not just we're following the farm kids. We actually are immersing ourselves in an already set up world and conflicts. It makes sense that the books focused on the farm kids, as that's what was big in publishing at the time. You let the reader know a little bit about the world at a time. We follow the classic hero's journey and classic character archetype. We follow young characters who haven't done anything of note in their lives yet, and we learn about the world along with the character. And then in book 2, we get to spend a little bit of time at the magic school, the White Tower, but it's always from the point of view of somebody who's never seen it before and is learning all about this for the first time. We don't see it in the books from the point of view of a teacher who is navigating the intense, complex issues that are surrounding adults in this area. That makes sense for back when this book was published. That's what people wanted. But now we've reached a point in society where people are actually gravitating towards learning about the stories and seeing things from the point of view from older women who have power and experience. After the success of the Game of Thrones show, producers and executives have realized that people, even laymen, are interested in political intrigue. They're interested in the politics of stuff, of complex organizations filled with adults navigating it who already know the system. They aren't only looking for the stories of children coming of age who have to learn about all this stuff. And so I see why the showrunners didn't want to wait until they reached book 4 or 5 of the story in order to start incorporating those things into major plot lines. Fleshing out Moraine and Lan's storylines in season 1 let new watchers really understand who the Aes Sedai are and connect to Moraine and Lan as characters individually, rather than these unobtainable, untouchable figures that they were in the books. When Gandalf was killed by the Balrog in the Fellowship of the Ring, we weren't sad for Gandalf. We were sad for the hobbits, for Sam and Frodo and maybe Aragorn, people who had known Gandalf and were feeling his loss. We didn't really connect to Gandalf himself. We didn't know Gandalf's hopes and fears and struggles and all the complex issues that he was facing as, well, one of the Maiar. We only ever knew him as that wizard who sets off the fireworks, who we really like, who is a comforting and strong, sure presence. We don't know him, only what he can do for us. I think the show did a great job of breaking Moraine and Lan from that mold that so many figures like Gandalf fit into in the fantasy genre. We get to see Moraine and her struggling. We get to see Lan and actually his internal thoughts. Because in the books, we only see Lan from the point of view of children who just see this stoic, stone-faced man. But if you actually pay attention to the story and then his interactions with Moraine when other people aren't around, or his own point of view chapters, he is so filled with emotion. He is not an emotionless, stone-faced, perfectly even-tempered person. But we don't get to see that in the books until later, and in the show, they're going ahead and giving us a way to attach to him and Moraine as people, rather than just as the big figures who know a lot about the world. So expanding Moraine and Lan's stories, and especially showing Lan's interactions with Nynaeve, lays the foundation for future plot lines. It lays the foundation for understanding their characters better, and it's just a great addition to the story to show that everyone's a main character. There's not just one person or one type of person that we're following in this story. And so adding in storylines that center Moraine and Lan, I felt was a really good choice for the show to really flesh out all of our main characters, as well as introducing a lot of world building elements and White Tower politics that will be important later on. I thought that it was really clever to take things that happened in the book, but just off page, the capturing of Logain as a false dragon and him being brought to the White Tower. I felt like that was a really good choice of a storyline to add in, bringing it from off page to on screen. This actually shows how dangerous men who can channel are. It shows some of the politics behind the Dragon Reborn, which the entire first season and first book is revolving around, is who is the Dragon Reborn? When the dragon is reborn, shit's gonna go down. So seeing somebody who's claiming to be the Dragon Reborn and seeing all the different people's views of them, from the King of Ghealdan to Moraine to Corenne to Liandrin to Olenna, everybody has a different view of this figure, and it's important to get that seeded into the story so that viewers can understand what we're up against here when we find out that one of our beloved characters is that figure. I loved that we got introduced to Olenna, who becomes a very important character later on. We got introduced to her already, and we got her ideology of the world. We're introduced to Liandrin, who also is a very important person in especially book 2 and book 3. And we get to introduced to Corenne, who actually is killed off screen, having no page time, off page, no page time in the prologue. Like the prologue book, New Spring, to the entire series. I love that we brought her and made her a real character and got to see different aspects of her. I thought it was a really great choice for the showrunners to add this into the adaptation, and it makes the show stronger and gives new viewers a better, broader view of this expansive world that they're stepping into. And so I think that is probably long enough. I'm sure most of you have clicked off this video by now, but if you haven't, thank you so much for actually watching to the end, and go ahead and give it a like so that more people who are interested in these types of analyses about TV shows, adaptations, and the Wheel of Time can see it. As I'm a writer myself, I'm really sensitive to adaptations of books to screen because it can be done really poorly, and I know that the adaptation of the Wheel of Time was a bit divisive in the Wheel of Time fandom. There were many people who felt like it deviated too far from the books, and some very strange arguments that don't make much sense to me, saying that, oh, they added this thing that wasn't in the books, and I look at it and I'm like, no, that's literally directly a scene that happened in the books. What are you talking about? So I just wanted to make at least this one video about how I feel like they actually stayed very true to the story in this adaptation. They drew directly from the book in so many scenes, bits of dialogue, character moments, just places. They drew directly from the books. And then some things that they did change, but I feel like are good actually to change in the adaptation. So I hope that this was entertaining for you. Maybe you learned a little something. Maybe you look at adaptations a little bit differently, because I know it was really hard for me to accept that adaptations don't have to be a one-for-one recreation of the book. It's okay to be an adaptation that's not exactly the same. And maybe some big things are changed. But I think that the heart of the story remains true, and given their limitations in time, because it's only 8 episodes, 1-hour episodes each, some things are going to have to be dropped. Some lighter moments are probably going to have to be dropped. And so I feel like it's kind of important to analyze what they did drop, what they didn't drop, and why the adaptation, at least for me, really, really works. We will, of course, see how things pan out in season 2 of The Wheel of Time as well. I think they just announced that it's going to be a 2023 release date, which sucks because I want it now, but I understand with COVID and everything, it's just not possible. But I am excited for the Lord of the Rings adaptation that's coming later this year, which is going to be quite similar to The Wheel of Time, I feel, in that it's not a one-for-one recreation of things from the Silmarillion. It's going to be a lot of new stories that are true to the stories in the Silmarillion and the lore and world that Tolkien created. So I'll probably do some videos of that as well, and I'll probably do a few more Wheel of Time videos because Wheel of Time is something I'm really passionate about, but I do want to make sure that I'm continuing to focus on the writing aspect and storytelling, because that is what this channel is about, is writing and how to tell the story in a good, meaningful way. And I feel like talking about adaptations of books is a great way to do that. I am on TikTok, and I do post more reliably on TikTok, but this past year has been kind of crazy. I haven't posted a YouTube video in forever, and I've just now started back making TikToks more reliably. So if you do want to check me out on TikTok, you can go to High Fantasy Writing on TikTok as well and follow me over there. I don't really post on Instagram ever, and if you want to follow me on Twitter of Time, I will put a link to that in the description down below. I can't remember exactly what my Twitter handle is. Yeah, I can't remember what I chose for my Twitter handle, but I'll put it in the description below. And mostly on Twitter, if I actually post and tweet anything myself, it's about the Wheel of Time. I do repost and like a lot of things about like social justice and activism and political things happening. My name is April. I am a writer, and I'm just really passionate about storytelling. And if you'd like to come along, hit like, hit subscribe, look out for more of my videos. I have a lot of writing videos that I've posted in the past, so you can check those out as well. I hope you have a wonderful day, and happy writing!